We're going to do this in English, I think. A couple of years ago, I spoke with Charlie Veron. Charlie Veron, he's the world leading coral reef scientist. He has 3 university degrees. He has spent more than 7,000 hours diving since he was 18 years old. And Charlie, he has discovered more than half of the world's corals. He's now 72, and he suffers from a depression because half of the world's corals are dead. I spoke with Charlie Veron because I was writing an article about scientists and climate depression for the Danish newspaper Information. 1 second. And Charlie, he said to me, Morten, it's like living in a hell. But still he continues to work because the corals are like my children. I can't just let them down, he said. I cried when I had spoken to him. It was a very emotional experience to listen to Charlie Veron's words. And it was also very emotional to hear a leading scientist being so open about his deep personal feelings. When I did research for that article, I also spoke with a Swedish climate scientist. He couldn't stop crying in the phone. I don't think he had ever spoken to a journalist before and being so emotionally open about his feelings. Still, he when the interview was over, he told me that he didn't want to be quoted for the article because he was afraid to lose his job if he was being so emotional. Early one morning last week, I checked the news on my cell phone when I woke up. Probably a lot of us do that. I read the news about deforestation in the Brazilian Amazonas. It had exploded in July. I say, just what a terrible way to start the day. Probably a lot of you know the feeling. I'm Morten Steiniche. I'm a journalist, as you can figure out. I also started an NGO called Care for Activists back in 2015. And the reason I started the NGO was because I discovered that a lot of activists, not just scientists, but also activists, have a lot of emotional issues to deal with. And research actually shows that 50 to 60% of everyone who devoted time for a cause as an activist will leave the cause again, often within a few months. And why will they do that? Well, there are several reasons for that. Activists are very often emotionally dedicated in the causes. I mean, no normal people would want to stay for a bridge for 24 hours, only the dedicated ones. Activists work for a lot of hours. If you are a climate activist, you will know that the climate issues are enormous. And because the problems are so big, we often feel discouraged. Activism is often also a cultural guilt. We feel we should be doing a lot more than we actually do. Activists are volunteers. It means that money can certainly be a stressful factor because we do spend so much time being activists. There are also some other reasons for activists being stressed and depressed. One is that activists often deny themselves self-care. And self-care in activist communities is often considered to be a narcissistic act. Stress and depression is often considered to be a sign of weakness in activism, which is also why that many activists often don't speak about it. It becomes a taboo. And actually in the NGO organization, stress and burnout and depression is very much a taboo in many places. And last, activists often feel resistance from the outside world. Why don't you find a proper job? It is ridiculous to be a vegan. Do you really think that you can save the world? What is the purpose of blocking a bridge? We, the activists, often feel like outsiders. Why I'm speaking about this, why should we care about it? Well, first of all, because it is our health that is at stake here. And because if we're not dealing with those issues in a healthy way, we can't fight for the causes with the muscles that are needed to change the world. And because at every time someone leaves Extinction Rebellion because he, she, or it is exhausted or disillusioned, the movement will lose a little bit of momentum. So it is time for us to heal our wounds, to become warriors. So the question is, what can we do about it? Well, I think that we can create a space in Extinction Rebellion for community care. We can start to be aware of people around us. We can also allow ourselves to self-care. It is okay not to participate in an action or a meeting if you don't feel like you're on top of it. And we can start to talk about it. We can talk about the feelings that drags us down, like climate grief. Some years ago, some climate scientists started a project called This Is How You Feel. In handwritten letters, the scientists write about their feelings related to climate change. And that's actually a very good way to start healing those feelings, to write about it or to talk about it. Next week, next Wednesday, we're starting a climate grief circle at Copenhagen. It will go on for 4 Wednesdays in a row, and it starts 4:30 every time. It will be 45 minutes of sharing, followed by different kind of exercises. And you're all welcome to participate. I will put up some info about it at Mattermost and Facebook on Monday, and then you can sign up. It is important that you sign up because we can only have 10 people per time, because we want to give everyone the opportunity to speak. And yeah. So please join the Climate Grief Circle that starts Wednesday if you feel like. And now Duda will show us some exercises. Thank you.